Hey guys, tonight we're traveling back thousands of years into a world where medicine wasn't found in clean white clinics or sterile glass bottles, but in the glow of oil lamps, the smell of crushed herbs, and the hum of prayers whispered into the dark. You're stepping into a place where healing was equal parts faith, fear, and wild experimentation. You probably won't survive this, but it's worth the risk, right? So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And what's your local time right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wander through a narrow passageway, lit by flickering candlelight. The air feels thick, humid, alive with the scent of burning herbs. Somewhere ahead, you hear a rhythmic chant, the low hum of ancient healers at work. In the distance, the shadows move, men and women who believed they could speak to sickness itself. This is the beginning of medicine, before microscopes, before hospitals, before anyone knew what a germ was. In this world, sickness wasn't just something that happened to the body. It was a message from something unseen. When your leg ached or your head throbbed, it meant that the gods were displeased, or a spirit had slipped into you like cold air through a crack in the wall. You didn't just treat a fever, you negotiated with it, begged it to leave. You look around and see baskets filled with strange roots, tiny bones, bits of dried insects. Every item here carries meaning. Some were used for their real chemical effects, though no one knew that yet. Others were charms, ingredients meant to trick evil spirits into letting go. You see a healer grinding herbs on a stone slab. The powder he makes will be mixed with wine, honey, and maybe a prayer or two. It's strange, isn't it? For all our modern confidence, these ancient healers weren't as clueless as we think. Some of their remedies worked. Honey, for example, used by Egyptians and Mesopotamians alike, was an excellent antibacterial agent. They smeared it on wounds, not knowing it stopped infections. That's one mainstream historical fact that would surprise you. The first antibiotic wasn't penicillin. It was honey and mold, long before modern chemistry gave it a name. But the atmosphere here is also deeply mystical. You can feel it, the blending of the physical and spiritual. To them, the body was not a machine. It was a sacred vessel connected to the earth, the stars, and invisible energies. A stomach ache might mean you angered your ancestors. A fever might mean the moon was out of balance. You walk closer to one of the patients lying on a woven mat. His face is pale, eyes half closed. The healer touches his chest gently, listening, not with a stethoscope, but with intuition. He mumbles words in a language no one writes down. Then he takes a sharp obsidian blade and makes a tiny incision, pressing out blackened blood. You flinch, but the others nod approvingly. They believe sickness leaves through the blood. There's a strange beauty to it, this blend of terror and tenderness. The healer truly believes he is saving this man's life, and maybe in a way he is. The ritual calms the mind, gives the sick man hope, and hope, even now, has measurable healing power. You lean closer and notice marks etched on the wall, diagrams of the body, drawn in crude but thoughtful lines. A heart, lungs, intestines, drawn not from dissection, but from observation and imagination. Scholars still argue whether these early symbols were medical records or spiritual maps of the human soul. Maybe they were both. The night deepens and the chants slow to a murmur. A clay lamp flickers beside you, its flame dancing like breath. The healer drops something into the fire, dried sage, maybe frankincense. The smoke rises, twisting upward. You realize that even this act, smoke cleansing the air, was unintentionally practical. The herbs used in rituals often had antibacterial properties, driving away not just spirits, but real infections. You begin to see how the line between magic and medicine was never clear. Maybe it still isn't. The healer now sits quietly, his hands stained with earth and resin. He closes his eyes, and for a moment, the entire room feels suspended in time. You can almost sense the weight of generations watching over this place. People who lived, healed, and died before the world had words for bacteria or organs or oxygen. Yet somehow, they kept each other alive long enough to build the future. You think of how fragile that survival must have been. A small cut could turn deadly. A bad meal could mean fever and death. Life expectancy barely touched 40. Every cure mattered. Every healer was a flicker of hope in an ocean of fear. And yet, they persisted, gathering plants, observing wounds, noticing what worked. Slowly, almost accidentally, knowledge began to form. You step back into the cool night air outside the hut. Crickets hum softly. The stars burn above you like pinpricks through dark cloth. You realize that this moment of quiet between sickness and understanding was where human curiosity was born. The desire to know why. The need to heal even without certainty. You look back at the faint glow of the healer's lamp fading into the night. He doesn't know it, but his small experiments, his strange rituals, are laying the foundation for everything that comes after. For Hippocrates, Galen, Sushruta, and Avicenna, and all the minds who will shape medicine into science. As the night air brushes against your skin, you take a slow breath. You can smell ash, herbs, and something faintly metallic, like old blood and bronze. You feel both disturbed and strangely comforted. Humanity has always been afraid of the unknown, but it's that same fear that drives us to learn, to test, to survive. The lamp sputters, the wind cools, and the whispers fade. You're left with one thought. Maybe healing has always been less about certainty and more about connection. Between people, between mind and body, between the living and the unknown. And so, your journey begins. You wake before dawn, the air still cool, a faint gray light spilling across the land. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster cries, a reminder that life continues even when fear rules every corner of it. You wander through a village built from clay and faith, where every cough, every ache, every drop of blood has a story told in whispers. Here, sickness isn't just a biological inconvenience. It's a message, a divine whisper, a warning from something greater than you. When your child grows pale and feverish, you don't reach for a thermometer, you reach for the sky. You stare at the clouds and ask the gods what you did wrong. The idea that your body could simply fail on its own hasn't been invented yet. If your crops die, if your stomach burns, if your eyes swell, it all means one thing. The spirits are angry. You step into the shadow of a massive stone temple. Smoke curls upward from a fire pit, and you can hear chants echoing inside. The priests move rhythmically, their arms raised toward carvings of gods with eyes like suns. Offerings line the altar, fruit, coins, small animals. Somewhere in the crowd, a mother kneels beside a child covered in rashes. She holds a small clay figurine close to her chest, hoping it will absorb the sickness and carry it away. It's unsettling, isn't it? The faith that illness could be bargained with. You find yourself torn between disbelief and admiration, because even though the logic is gone, the hope feels timeless. The same desperation echoes in hospital waiting rooms today, just with cleaner walls and more paperwork. You watch as the high priest steps forward. His voice is low, commanding, but there's an urgency behind it. He sprinkles a powder made from crushed minerals and herbs into the fire, and the smoke thickens. The child is carried closer to the flames. Everyone holds their breath. The ritual begins.
The people believe that the smoke itself has power, that it can confuse the spirit of sickness and drive it out. They'd chant the god's name over and over until the sound becomes a single vibration in the air. The child coughs, the fire snaps, and the smell of burning sage fills your lungs. Oddly enough, there's some logic hiding beneath this. Many of these purification rituals used real substances, resins like frankincense and myrrh, which have antimicrobial properties. They didn't know it, but while they prayed to unseen deities, the smoke was actually disinfecting the space around them. Scholars still argue whether early priests knew the practical effects of these rituals or if it was all coincidence. But either way, people survived because of them. You walk outside, your ears still ringing from the chants. The sun has climbed higher now, and life has resumed its normal rhythm. Farmers pull water from wells, potters shape clay, children chase each other barefoot through the dust. Yet behind every smile, there's fear, a constant awareness that sickness can strike without warning, and when it does, you turn to the only explanation you know, the gods. You travel further, across lands where belief takes new shapes but tells the same story. In Mesopotamia, clay tablets describe demons that creep through doorways at night, bringing fever and madness. In Egypt, priests blame Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of plagues, for outbreaks that sweep through the villages. In Greece, Apollo is both the bringer and the reliever of disease. Everywhere you look, the line between divine wrath and natural cause remains blurred. Imagine waking up one morning with a pounding headache. In our time, you'd blame dehydration or stress, but in this world, you'd wonder which god you angered. Maybe you forgot an offering. Maybe you walked past a sacred place without bowing. The first step in healing wasn't taking medicine, it was confessing guilt. You stop at a small hut near the river, drawn by the rhythmic sound of drumming. Inside, a woman sits cross-legged before a sick man. She wears strings of shells and bones, her eyes closed, her hands moving in circles over his body. The drumbeat grows faster. The villagers watch in silence. The woman suddenly exhales, as if spitting something invisible from her mouth. The people sigh of relief. The spirit has been expelled. You might laugh, but the structure of it, the rhythm, the breath, the focus resembles hypnosis or early psychotherapy. Ancient people were unknowingly practicing what modern medicine now calls the placebo effect. They created hope, ritualized it, and through that, sometimes healed. You sit quietly as the man opens his eyes. He looks calmer now, breathing evenly. Maybe it's coincidence. Maybe it's the herbs burning in the corner. Maybe it's the belief itself doing the work. Later, you walk through a narrow street lined with tiny shrines. At each corner, someone stops to leave a flower, a bit of food, or a coin. You realize how deeply the concept of illness and morality intertwine here. Health isn't just physical, it's spiritual balance. To be sick is to be out of harmony with the universe. And strangely enough, that idea never really left us. We still say things like, stress made me sick, or I feel off balance. We still sense the body and mind as one, even if we use different words. Maybe the ancients weren't entirely wrong, just poetic in their diagnosis. The breeze picks up, carrying the smell of incense and river mud. You watch the sunlight glint off the temple walls and realize that early medicine was never about control, it was about surrender. They didn't understand pathogens or physiology, so they created meaning instead. Meaning gave them courage. One scholar once wrote that ancient people didn't fear illness itself, they feared what it meant. Every fever was a story, every cough a divine metaphor. In a way, it made suffering bearable. Pain wasn't random, it was communication. You sit by the riverbank, watching ripples distort your reflection. If you lived then, you might have carried a small amulet of clay shaped like your body part that ached, a miniature arm for pain, a tiny stomach for cramps. You'd bury it in the ground, believing the sickness would fade as the earth reclaimed it. Archaeologists still dig up these votive offerings today, little clay bodies left behind by people hoping the gods would notice their quiet prayers. You wonder if they did. As the sun sinks lower, you hear a bell ring from the temple, a soft sound that drifts over the water. The villagers bow their heads, eyes closed. You do too, not out of faith, but out of respect. You can feel the weight of centuries pressing through this simple act. Fear, belief, and hope, all woven together into the first threads of what we now call medicine. And as twilight spreads, you realize something important. Humans have always searched for order in chaos. When we didn't understand the body, we turned to the divine. When we didn't have answers, we built stories that comforted us. And maybe that's the real cure. Not herbs, not fire, but the idea that we aren't helpless. That even when we don't understand why we're sick, we can still believe there's meaning behind it. The temple fades behind you. The stars blink awake one by one. You walk on, the whispers of ancient gods fading into the hum of night insects. Somewhere ahead, another healer waits, with new ideas, sharper tools, and a little more courage to question the divine.
You arrive at dawn on the banks of the Nile, where the air smells of wet clay and blooming lotus. The sunlight slides slowly over the pyramids, catching the gold-painted tips before warming the sand below. This is ancient Egypt, a civilization obsessed with life, death, and everything in between. And here, medicine isn't just about healing the living, it's about preserving them for eternity. You wander through narrow streets filled with the clatter of pottery, the hiss of papyrus being unrolled, and the sharp scent of resin. Healers here are not ordinary men. They are priests, trained in the sacred art of mummification, anatomy by necessity. Every preserved body is a lesson in how the human machine comes apart, and how it can be put back together again. Inside a small temple by the water, you see shelves lined with jars, powders, and strange instruments. A papyrus scroll lies open on a smooth stone slab, its ink still dark after thousands of years. The hieroglyphs dance across the surface like tiny secrets, and you realize you're looking at the Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest medical documents in history, dating back to around 1550 BCE. It lists hundreds of remedies: honey for wounds, moldy bread for infection, willow bark for pain. You blink. Wait, willow bark? That's where aspirin comes from. You almost laugh because it means these ancient healers were giving patients painkillers before the word chemistry even existed. Scholars still argue whether they knew why it worked or if it was just lucky intuition. But either way, it did. You run your fingers along the edge of a copper knife, dulled by time but still gleaming faintly. Surgery here is not a forbidden art, it's a profession. The Egyptians knew how to set bones, stitch wounds, and even perform rudimentary brain operations. They learned by watching what happened during embalming, when they carefully removed organs to prepare bodies for the afterlife. Every incision was practice, every corpse a classroom. You watch a healer at work now on a living patient, a man with a deep cut along his forearm. The healer's hands move with quiet confidence. He washes the wound with beer and honey, presses linen strips soaked in oil, and whispers a prayer to Sekhmet, the fierce goddess of healing and war. It's a blend of science and superstition, sterile technique mixed with sacred words. The patient winces but doesn't pull away. You think about that combination, ritual and reason, and realize it's the foundation of all medicine. Even now, people say please before swallowing bitter pills, as if politeness might persuade the body to cooperate. In one corner of the room, another healer mixes a paste of herbs and, wait for it,
crocodile dung. Yes, that was a real treatment. Egyptians used it as a base for contraceptive pessaries, believing it could prevent pregnancy. Spoiler, it didn't. But mixed in with all the bizarre concoctions were genuine breakthroughs. Aloe vera for burns, castor oil for digestion, opium for pain. The line between nonsense and knowledge was razor thin, but somehow they kept crossing it in the right direction. You move closer to a wall covered in hieroglyphs showing a man seated with a patient. Between them, tools, forceps, scalpels, needles. They look surprisingly familiar. These aren't primitive instruments. They're precise, elegant, functional. Modern surgeons would recognize them instantly. Nearby, another scroll lists 700 remedies, from heart conditions to hair loss. Honey appears again and again. It's everywhere, in wound care, throat soothers, and eye ointments. They didn't know about bacteria, but honey's antibacterial power made it one of the most effective treatments in history. If you're keeping score, the ancients are still ahead of us in some ways. Outside, the heat builds. You follow a procession through the marketplace, past rows of jars filled with herbs, coriander, cumin, garlic. The smell is intoxicating. Garlic, especially, was prized by Egyptian healers. They gave it to laborers building the pyramids, believing it made them stronger and kept disease away. Oddly enough, they were right. Garlic contains allicin, a natural antibiotic. Thousands of years later, scientists would rediscover what the Egyptians already knew by taste and intuition. You pause beside a group of young apprentices grinding herbs with pestles. They chatter softly, occasionally laughing, their white linen tunics catching the sun. There's a sense of pride here, of tradition passed down through whispered instruction and sacred duty. You realize these aren't just healers, they're custodians of human knowledge, preserving what they've learned, not for wealth, but for continuity. One of them offers you a small clay cup filled with a dark, thick liquid. You hesitate, then sip. It's bitter, earthy, but strangely comforting. The healer nods approvingly. For fever, he says, tapping his temple. You have no idea what's in it. Maybe willow, maybe date wine. But you feel the sincerity behind the gesture. That alone is medicine. Later, you wander into a quieter chamber, a room filled with linen-wrapped forms. The mummification process is underway. The smell of natron salt and resin fills the air. A priest carefully removes the brain of the deceased through the nose using a thin bronze hook. You almost turn away, but then you realize this act, as gruesome as it seems, was how they learned anatomy. They saw firsthand how organs connected, how muscles layered, how bones supported life. The priest hums softly as he works, muttering a prayer for safe passage into the next world. Every step has both purpose and poetry. To them, understanding the body was a sacred responsibility, not just curiosity. There's a mainstream historical fact here that most people overlook. Ancient Egyptians were among the first to record case studies, actual medical documentation. They described symptoms, predicted outcomes, and suggested treatments based on observation. They didn't call it clinical trials, but it was close enough. As the sun sets outside, the room glows with golden firelight. You notice the walls are covered with drawings of the human form, hearts, veins, even the brain, although they thought it was useless compared to the heart. A charming mistake, considering how much time they spent removing it. But still, the precision is astonishing. You can almost feel their curiosity, their need to understand what makes a person alive. You step back into the warm night, the air vibrating with the chirp of insects and the slow current of the Nile. The stars reflect in the water, turning the river into a mirror of eternity. You realize that the Egyptians didn't just build pyramids for their dead. They built medicine for their living. They turned death itself into a teacher. You can almost hear the whispers of those ancient healers through time. Observe, record, repeat. It's the same mantra every doctor still follows, whether they're holding a scalpel or a stethoscope. And it all began here, under this same moon, beside this same river, with honey, herbs, and a little bit of faith. You take one last look at the temple glowing in the distance, its reflection shimmering across the Nile. The night smells of smoke and sweetness, and for a moment you feel a quiet gratitude for the strange brilliance of those who came before. They may have worshipped gods, but they were already serving science.
You wander through the warm, salt-scented air of ancient Greece, sandals scraping against stone, the rhythmic hum of cicadas in the olive groves, and the faint scent of incense wafting from a hillside temple. This isn't a place of superstition alone, not anymore. Something's changing here. You can feel it. The Greeks, curious, poetic, endlessly philosophical, have started to ask questions that the gods alone can't answer. For centuries, illness was seen as a curse, a divine punishment sent by Zeus or Apollo or some lesser deity with a grudge. But as you step inside the temple of Asclepius, god of healing, you realize something profound. These people aren't just praying anymore. They're observing, watching, recording, and in doing so, they're about to shift the story of medicine forever. Inside the temple, torchlight flickers across marble walls lined with votive offerings, carved limbs, sculpted hearts, and tiny stone eyes, each one left behind by someone healed, or at least hopeful. You hear soft chanting, the rustle of robes and the clinking of bronze bowls. Priests whisper prayers while patients sleep in the abaton, the sacred dormitory, hoping Asclepius will visit them in their dreams to reveal a cure. But beneath all this ritual, something quietly revolutionary is happening. A man named Hippocrates, born around 460 BCE, has started to strip away divine mystery and replace it with logic. You can almost see him now, broad-shouldered, calm, writing by lamplight on a scroll that will change the world. His theory? That illness isn't punishment from the gods, but an imbalance within the body itself. You pick up a clay tablet and trace the symbols, 4 simple elements that rule all things: earth, air, fire, and water. To Hippocrates, these correspond to 4 vital fluids, or humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. If one dominates, chaos reigns: fever, madness, despair. Health, he believes, is balance, harmony. You can't pray that into place. You have to restore it. And so the treatment begins. You watch as a healer, not a priest, studies a patient's complexion. He presses a hand to their pulse, examines the color of their eyes, even listens to the rhythm of their breathing. Too much blood, he mutters, and gestures for a small bronze scalpel. The idea of bleeding someone might sound barbaric now, but back then it was revolutionary. A logical attempt to restore equilibrium, to drain excess and let nature heal. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it didn't. Scholars still argue whether Hippocrates truly wrote all the texts attributed to him, or whether his followers simply turned his name into a symbol. But one thing's certain: the Hippocratic approach, observation over superstition, was a spark that lit the long fuse of modern medicine. You stroll through the healing sanctuary, where patients bathe in mineral waters, drink herbal tonics, and follow prescribed diets of grains, figs, and wine. No one rushes the process. Healing here is slow, holistic, almost spiritual. Hippocrates insists that food is medicine and rest is sacred. A healer's duty, he says, is not to fight the disease, but to assist nature's own power to heal. You can't help but smile at the simplicity and the wisdom. After all, it's not so different from what doctors still say. Eat well, sleep enough, listen to your body. Some things never really change. Still, the Greeks had their quirks. You peek into a small chamber where a woman chews fennel for digestion, and another lies covered in crushed snails for skin ailments. A young boy is instructed to sleep with a lizard tied around his wrist to cure epilepsy. Even in this age of reason, superstition hasn't died. It's just learned to coexist with science. At the edge of the temple, you come across an inscription carved deep into stone. Let food be thy medicine, and medicine be thy food. It's one of those phrases so timeless that even now, thousands of years later, it feels like something your grandmother might say while serving soup. Nearby, another healer mixes a salve of honey, olive oil, and wine. It's applied to a soldier's wound, the sticky mixture glistening in the lamplight. You realize honey, that same golden nectar used by Egyptians centuries earlier, still holds power here. It's antibacterial, soothing, and symbolic of nature's perfection. You catch fragments of philosophical debate among students under the portico. Some claim that emotions can disturb the humors, causing melancholy or mania. Others argue that environment plays a role, that swamp air, bad water, or the wrong wind can bring disease. These ideas might sound primitive, but they lay the groundwork for something astonishingly modern, the concept of environmental health. Outside, the night is cool. A breeze passes through the olive trees, carrying the faint echo of lyres and laughter from the city below. You realize this isn't just a temple, it's an early hospital, a place where faith and reason meet halfway. Patients aren't just treated, they're observed, studied, and remembered. Their ailments become data, their recovery, evidence. Somewhere in the distance, a philosopher murmurs that life itself is a balance of opposites, hot and cold, wet and dry, joy and sorrow. And you can't help but wonder, maybe Hippocrates wasn't just talking about the body. Maybe he was describing the entire human experience. As you leave the temple, the faint scent of rosemary and myrrh lingers in the air. You step into the moonlight, carrying with you a quiet respect for those early thinkers who dared to ask why when everyone else said, because the gods willed it. Medicine, you realize, didn't begin with miracles. It began with curiosity and the courage to bleed for balance. You wander into ancient Rome, a city that smells like everything and nothing at once. The air is heavy with incense, sweat, olive oil, roasted meat, and the faint tang of vinegar. Beneath towering aqueducts and marble temples, life thrums with astonishing energy and surprisingly good hygiene. For a civilization famous for blood sports and conquests, the Romans were also obsessed with cleanliness. They believed purity of the body kept the mind and the empire strong. So, where do you go first? Naturally, the baths. You follow the chatter of citizens down winding streets until you reach the Grand Thermae, Rome's public bath complex, part spa, part gym, part social hub. The structure looms ahead like a palace, steam rising from marble pools, mosaic floors glittering with colored tiles, and echoes of laughter bouncing off vaulted ceilings. You step inside and immediately feel the shift in air. Warm, fragrant, alive. You hand your sandals to an attendant and enter the tepidarium, the warm room. Steam curls around your skin, carrying the scent of oils and herbs. Men discuss politics, gossip, and gladiator matches, while slaves massage their backs with olive oil and scrape off dirt with curved brawn tools called strigils. It's equal parts self-care and spectacle. You wander deeper into the caldarium, the hot bath chamber, where pools bubble like cauldrons and the heat fogs the mosaic walls. People sit shoulder to shoulder, half sweating, half arguing about philosophy and trade routes. Someone cracks a joke about how the emperor should spend less time in the Senate and more time in the baths. Everyone laughs. But this isn't just luxury. It's health. The Romans believe bathing daily purifies the body and prevents disease. Afterward, they plunge into the frigidarium, the cold pool. The shock of it jolts your senses awake. You catch your reflection in the rippling surface and realize this is the ancient world's version of wellness culture. No scented candles or spa playlists, just communal heat, conversation, and a little bit of vinegar. Ah, yes, vinegar. Rome's secret weapon. You spot a medicus, a Roman surgeon, cleaning his bronze tools in a small side chamber. The smell of vinegar stings your nose as he pours it over scalpels and forceps. It's not sterilization as we understand it, but it's shockingly close. Vinegar's acidic nature makes it a crude disinfectant, killing some bacteria before the word bacteria even exists. You watch him wipe the blades carefully, then signal for his next patient. On a wooden table lies a soldier, pale but stoic, his arm gashed from battle. The surgeon hums under his breath, steady and methodical. He pours wine over the wound, because, of course, Roman wine is practically a cure-all, and begins to stitch using catgut thread. The patient grits his teeth. Around them, the smoky air hums with tension and the faint metallic smell of blood. It's brutal, but it's also remarkable. Roman military medicine was advanced, some say more so than what Europe would have again for nearly 1,000 years after the empire fell. Field hospitals called valetudinaria followed the legions, treating everything from spear wounds to dysentery. Surgeons carried kits filled with scalpels, hooks, tweezers, and bone saws, many of which look eerily similar to modern tools. Scholars still argue whether Roman physicians truly understood infection or simply relied on ritual cleanliness. Either way, their practices worked often enough to earn them respect and patience. You wander through a smaller, less glamorous bathhouse in the poorer district. The floors are cracked, the water tepid, the smell less than inviting. Here, hygiene is a luxury, not a guarantee. You can smell the city beyond. Garbage, sweat, and decay, blending into something both human and horrible. Rome may have had aqueducts and sewers, but disease still lurked in every crowded tenement and open latrine. You pass a perfumer's stall, where oils of rose, myrrh, and cinnamon mask the ever-present stink. The Romans were masters of the cover-up, literally. Wealthy women dabbed perfume under their arms and behind their knees. Men rubbed their bodies with scented oils instead of soap. And though they might not have understood germs, they knew one universal truth. Nobody wants to smell like the street. Nearby, a crowd gathers around a tooth puller. He yanks a molar from a screaming customer with frightening enthusiasm, then dips the pliers in wine before moving on. You wince, but can't look away. Dentistry, Roman style. Later, you find yourself in a dimly lit corner of the city where another kind of medicine thrives. Apothecaries grind herbs, resins, and even bits of crushed coral into powders. A woman buys ground garlic for her husband's cough. Another purchases powdered mouse bones for fertility. You spot a sign promising instant relief from melancholy, which, judging by the smell, might just be fermented fish oil. The Romans, for all their sophistication, weren't immune to superstition. Charms and amulets hung around necks to ward off the malocchio, the evil eye. Pliny the Elder wrote entire encyclopedias of bizarre cures, everything from drinking gladiator blood to wearing a dead frog as a talisman against fever. Not exactly the kind of health advice you'd want from your doctor today. Still, beneath the strangeness, there's progress. Rome's infrastructure, its clean water systems, aqueducts, and public latrines genuinely improved health for millions. People lived longer, cleaner lives than many would in medieval Europe centuries later. You return once more to the baths before leaving. The air is heavy, relaxing, hypnotic. You slip into the warm water and let it lap around your shoulders. Conversations blur into murmurs. Somewhere nearby, a flute plays softly. You realize these places weren't just for washing. They were sanctuaries, escapes from the chaos of empire.
You close your eyes, imagining the rhythm of life continuing outside. Chariots clattering over stone, bakers shouting, soldiers marching, healers mixing strange brews in smoky rooms. It's messy, imperfect, but undeniably alive. And as you step out, wrapped in a linen towel, you feel oddly refreshed, cleaner even. Maybe a little like a Roman yourself, equal parts elegance and grit. And as the city hums under the glow of torchlight, one thought lingers. Perhaps the real secret to Rome's medical legacy wasn't just vinegar, baths, or blades. It was the simple, stubborn belief that the human body, though fragile, could be understood, improved, and maybe even perfected.
You find yourself standing beneath a crimson dawn somewhere along the banks of the Ganges, the air thick with incense and the hum of temple bells. The world feels sacred here, calm yet charged, ancient yet alive. This isn't just a land of gods and mystics. It's a place where the body, mind, and spirit are seen as one continuous thread, fragile, luminous, and endlessly repairable. Somewhere nearby, steel glints in the morning light. You follow the sound of rhythmic chanting and discover a man bent over his patient, steady hands, calm eyes, and a wisdom that seems to hum in the air around him. This is Susruta, often called the father of surgery, and you, tonight's quiet traveler through time, are about to witness something astonishing, the dawn of surgical science itself. You step closer, half expecting a primitive scene, but what you see would put many later civilizations to shame. Instruments gleam in the light, scalpels, forceps, scissors, needles, all laid out in perfect order, crafted from shining metal. Beside them, bowls of warm ghee and herbal paste await use. The patient lies still, breathing slowly. There's no anesthesia, no sterile gloves, yet there's precision, there's purpose, and there's care. Susruta murmurs softly to his students, young healers in white cotton robes who hang on every word. He's teaching them not only how to cut, but when not to. A good surgeon, he says, is like a sculptor. His hands must be firm, but his heart gentle. You watch as he performs one of his most famous operations, rhinoplasty, the reconstruction of a nose. Using a small knife, he cuts a flap of skin from the patient's cheek, shapes it carefully, and grafts it onto the missing nose. He stitches it with fine thread, coats it in a paste of sandalwood and turmeric, then wraps it in linen. You can almost smell the antiseptic tang of those ancient herbs, nature's quiet anesthesia. And you realize this isn't myth, this is skill. Centuries before anesthesia, antiseptics, or even the word surgery reached Europe, Indian physicians were performing complex procedures with astounding success. You glance at the manuscript beside Susruta's tools, the Susruta Samhita. Written around 600 BCE, it's one of the world's earliest medical textbooks, filled with more than 300 surgical procedures and 120 instruments. There are instructions for cataract removal, hernia repair, cesarean delivery, and even dental extraction. It details how to set fractures, drain abscesses, and stop bleeding using pressure, fire, and herbs. You can almost imagine the reverence with which students studied those scrolls, memorizing every line by firelight. But this isn't just about physical wounds. The deeper philosophy here is that the body is a sacred vessel, a bridge between the material and the divine. Disease to Susruta is not a punishment, but a disturbance in the harmony of life's energies. Doshas, vata, air, pitta, fire, and kapha, water. When they fall out of balance, suffering begins. Healing, therefore, is not just a matter of cutting or stitching.
It's restoration. It's the art of bringing the body back into rhythm with the universe. You walk through a small Ayurvedic clinic nearby. Patients sit cross-legged as healers grind herbs into powders and oils. There's the sharp scent of neem and camphor, the earthy undertone of turmeric, and the subtle sweetness of honey. One patient drinks a bitter tonic to cleanse his blood. Another lies still while warm oil is poured over his forehead in a slow meditative rhythm. Every movement is deliberate, ritualistic, an act of devotion. Even the environment feels alive with intention. Birds chirp, bells ring softly, water flows. Everything part of the healing process. You realize how different this feels from the cold precision of Roman surgery or the philosophical calm of Greek medicine. Here, medicine isn't separate from life. It is life. Still, there's a striking practicality beneath the spirituality. Susruta teaches his students anatomy by dissecting the bodies of the recently deceased, something that would scandalize later cultures. He insists that to heal, you must see, you must know. How muscles interlace, how veins run, how the organs breathe together beneath the skin. His descriptions are so precise that modern surgeons can still recognize what he's describing. Scholars still argue whether Sushruta's work influenced later Greek medicine, whether ideas traveled west through trade routes long before the Renaissance claimed them as its own. The parallels are uncanny. Balance, diet, cleanliness, the connection between body and soul. Perhaps wisdom, like rivers, flows wherever it can. A faint breeze moves through the trees, carrying the scent of sandalwood and something metallic, the lingering smell of surgery. Susruta finishes stitching, wipes his tools, and turns to his students. His expression is serene, his voice calm but commanding. A healer who knows only the knife is no healer. You must learn the pulse, the breath, the spirit. The body does not lie. It speaks. His students nod solemnly. You can see it in their eyes, reverence mixed with awe. They're not just learning to mend flesh, they're learning to listen. Nearby, an old woman places her hand on her chest and whispers a prayer of thanks. Her son, once near death, now sits beside her, smiling weakly. He's alive because of Sushruta's steady hands and centuries of accumulated knowledge passed through chants and scrolls. The light begins to fade. You stand by the river's edge and watch the water shimmer in the dusk, reflecting the orange glow of countless oil lamps flickering to life. Somewhere in the distance, temple bells ring, merging with the quiet murmur of healers preparing for another night of tending wounds and souls alike. And you realize something profound. While other civilizations chased the cure for disease, ancient India sought the cure for disconnection. They believed healing began the moment compassion entered the room. It's no wonder they called their surgeons not just healers of the body, but surgeons of the soul.
You wander through the misty early morning streets of ancient China, the smell of wet earth and incense hanging in the air. Lanterns sway gently along narrow alleys, and the faint clatter of wooden sandals echoes from distant courtyards. Here, medicine is not just about organs, humors, or wounds. It's about energy, harmony, and balance. You can feel it in the air, like a subtle current tugging at your awareness. You follow a healer into a quiet pavilion where bamboo screens filter the pale sunlight. Inside, patients lie on mats, breathing slowly as the healer moves around them with deliberate calm. She doesn't reach for a scalpel or a poultice immediately. Instead, she places her hands lightly on their bodies,
feeling for resistance, tension, and warmth. She's listening, not with ears, but with intuition. She's seeking the flow of qi, the vital life force that courses through all living things. Qi isn't something you can see, yet it governs everything: health, emotion, vitality. When it flows freely, you are strong. When it stagnates or becomes blocked, illness follows. The healer explains this to her students, gesturing along invisible meridians that trace the human body like rivers mapped in the mind. You follow her hands as she moves, imagining currents flowing through flesh, bone, and breath. Nearby, a young apprentice lays out a series of fine needles, thin, golden, almost imperceptible. Acupuncture, you learn, isn't just poking the skin, it's a science of energy. Each insertion stimulates points along the meridians, nudging qi to flow, releasing blockages, restoring balance. Some patients sigh with relief, some laugh at a tingling sensation, others close their eyes as though floating. You lean closer to observe herbs being prepared. Dried roots, leaves, flowers, and bark are ground into powders and mixed into pastes, teas, and tinctures. Ginseng, astragalus, licorice, each has a purpose, not random, but carefully chosen to harmonize yin and yang, to strengthen organs or calm spirit and mind. Some of these herbs contain compounds that modern science now confirm can regulate blood pressure, reduce inflammation, or boost immunity. Scholars still argue whether ancient practitioners understood these chemical effects or relied purely on observation and intuition, but the results are undeniable. You follow the healer to a patient with a persistent cough. She instructs him to breathe slowly while applying a paste of chrysanthemum flowers and honey to his chest. Then she gently inserts a few needles along his back. He coughs less, exhales deeper, and smiles faintly. It's subtle, but it works. And it's not magic, it's system, rhythm, and centuries of empirical knowledge passed down in text and practice. You notice scrolls lined along the walls detailing anatomy, herbal formulas, and acupoint charts. Names like Zhongzhong Jing and Hua Tu appear, giants in Chinese medicine. Hua Tu in particular is famous for using anesthesia made from herbal wine to perform abdominal surgery centuries before the West would dare attempt such a thing. You can almost feel the courage it must have taken to trust plants, pulses, and intuition over brute force. You walk under a silvered moon, across dusty plains, the night alive with the chirping of crickets and the distant roar of lions. In the distance, the silhouettes of mud and thatch huts rise against the sky, smoke curling gently from small fires. This is a village alive with rhythm, ritual, and a medicine far older than any written text you've encountered. You enter the village cautiously, sensing that here, healing is not separate from life. It is life itself. You can feel it in the soft beat of drums echoing from the center of the settlement, in the hum of the wind weaving through acacia trees, in the whispering voices of elders sharing stories of ancestors. These are the sangomas, the traditional spirit doctors, keepers of a knowledge both mystical and practical. A healer steps forward, draped in beads and cowrie shells, carrying a bundle of dried herbs tied with sinew. Her eyes are deep pools of quiet authority, and as she speaks, you realize the words are not just instructions, they are history, philosophy, and pharmacology woven together. She begins by identifying the ailment not only through observation of the body, but through the patient's dreams, moods, and even the songs they hum. Illness in this worldview is as much spiritual as it is physical, a disruption in the connection between the living and the ancestors. You watch her grind leaves, roots, and bark with a stone mortar, the scents of ginger, neem, and moringa mingling in the night air. She mixes them into a paste, explaining that some plants serve as antiseptics, others as pain relievers, some to reduce fevers, and others to strengthen the spirit. It's remarkable. Centuries of empirical knowledge distilled into what modern pharmacologists now recognize as bioactive compounds. Some of these remedies literally contain active ingredients still used in contemporary medicine, like quinine from bark for malaria. Scholars still argue whether such treatments were discovered by observation, trial and error, or divine inspiration, but results speak for themselves. Nearby, a patient sits cross-legged by a fire, shivering from fever. The healer sprinkles a powder over him, muttering words in an old dialect. The community watches silently. Children press close, learning the sacred arts by example. The smoke swirls, carrying both the aroma of herbs and the unspoken promise of healing. You notice that while the methods seem ritualistic, they also serve real, measurable purposes. Some plants act as antiseptics, some as anti-inflammatories, and the repetitive rhythmic chanting can reduce anxiety and stress, a tangible physiological benefit. You follow the healer into a dim hut, where shelves are lined with jars of dried roots, seeds, and powders, each labeled in the cryptic hand of ancestors past. There's a delicate order here, a system passed down through generations, refined through practice. Some remedies are for cuts and wounds, others for digestive issues, others still for ailments of the mind, depression, melancholy, anxiety, showing that holistic healing is nothing new here. You notice an intriguing practice. Small charms and amulets are placed on patients or near remedies. Modern scientists might dismiss them as superstition, but you sense they serve a purpose. Placebo, ritual focus, and emotional reassurance. The mind and spirit, after all, are as integral to healing as herbs or incisions. In a clearing outside, a circle of villagers dances slowly around a fire, singing songs meant to honor ancestors and summon their guidance. You notice a woman picking herbs under the moonlight. She's memorized hundreds of plants and their uses, blending practical medicine with spiritual knowledge. There's no distinction here between science and soul. It's seamless. You feel the pulse of the village, the rhythm of tradition, and you understand that African medicine has always been empirical, holistic, and deeply human. It's about connecting the seen and unseen, body and spirit, present and past. Even today, pharmacologists study these plants to isolate compounds, finding that knowledge long considered folk wisdom holds remarkable efficacy. A patient with a snake bite receives a poultice made from crushed leaves and honey. The healer applies it slowly, speaking blessings with every movement. You can't help but marvel,
Centuries before modern antivenoms, these remedies literally saved lives, harnessing chemistry encoded in nature and amplified by ritual. You wander to the edge of the village, listening to the night chorus of insects and distant drums. The healer's words echo softly in your mind. To heal, you must honor the body, the spirit, and the ancestors. The words seem simple, but you sense the depth behind them. A framework for understanding disease and health long before laboratories, microscopes, or textbooks existed. Moonlight glints off small jars of powdered roots. You realize that Africa's traditional medicine is more than folklore. It is living pharmacology, empirical wisdom wrapped in ritual and cultural memory. Every chant, every poultice, every observation has a reason, whether spiritual, physiological, or both. As you step away from the village, the night feels alive. Every rustle of leaves, every distant drumbeat, every whisper of wind through the grass resonates with the presence of knowledge accumulated over millennia. You carry with you a profound respect. Medicine here is not just about curing, it's about sustaining life, honoring tradition, and weaving together the human experience with the natural and spiritual worlds.
You step cautiously into the narrow, cobbled streets of medieval Europe, the air thick with smoke, the tang of rot, and the faint aroma of herbs hanging from open windows. You can almost hear the whispers of fear in every alley, fear of the unknown, fear of death, fear of invisible invaders that strike without mercy. Plague, dysentery, and fevers are constant companions here, shadowing every life with dread. You pass a market where merchants sell dried rosemary, sage, and lavender, their scents attempting to mask the stench of human waste and decay. People walk hunched, faces pale, and some wear the infamous beak masks, filled with aromatic herbs meant to filter miasmas, the bad air believed to carry disease. You wrinkle your nose, realizing that sometimes medicine is as much about belief as biology. Inside a dimly lit apothecary, jars of powders and potions line the shelves. Healers grind roots, mix vinegar and honey, and sometimes add crushed gems or gold, more for spiritual benefit than chemical efficacy. A monk flips through a manuscript, muttering prayers for healing. You notice he pauses over a recipe claiming that powdered unicorn horn will cure madness. You can't help but smile. Centuries of misunderstanding, but the intention is earnest. Scholars still argue whether these remedies had any real effect or were entirely placebo, but in a world without hospitals, hope itself was a kind of medicine. You wander past a small chapel where the sick lie on straw mats. Priests sprinkle holy water, recite prayers, and touch patients with relics, claiming divine intervention can cure fever, plague, or even the Black Death. The boundary between spiritual and physical healing is blurred. Faith is as essential as a poultice or potion. You overhear a woman whisper that Saint Roch has protected her family from sickness, her eyes wide with both terror and relief. In a crowded courtyard, surgeons, often barbers with rudimentary tools, bleed patients, extract teeth, or perform amputations with terrifying efficiency. There is no anesthesia, no antiseptics, and yet somehow some patients survive. The line between life and death is razor thin. Vinegar, alcohol, and herbal compresses are applied, a crude attempt at antisepsis. You shiver, realizing that survival is part skill, part luck, and part divine favor. The streets themselves are battlegrounds. Rats scurry through refuse, flies buzz over rotting carcasses, and a thick fog hangs low. Even so, communities try to maintain hygiene with public baths, although these are rare and often shared with animals. You observe a midwife instructing women on herbal remedies for childbirth, insisting that rue and rosemary will ease labor pains. Some herbs, you note, actually work. Others are charming superstition. You follow a healer into a tiny cottage.
Inside, a man lies shivering, pale with fever. The healer applies poultices of vinegar-soaked cloth to his chest and wraps him in blankets. She murmurs protective prayers, draws a sigil on the floor, and lights a small candle. You realize that the combination of warmth, herbal treatment, and spiritual focus can have real physiological effects: stress reduction, circulation improvement, and pain relief, even if the actual illness remains untreated. A child cries nearby, suffering from a persistent cough. The mother feeds him a syrup of honey and sage while chanting softly. You notice that honey appears again and again in remedies across civilizations: Egypt, Greece, Rome, India, now Europe. A common thread of effective natural medicine. It's comforting to see this continuity, even in a world rife with fear and superstition. You wander into a plague hospital at the edge of the city, where patients are quarantined. The walls are thick with smoke from burning herbs meant to cleanse the air. Nurses move carefully, their faces hidden behind masks, tending to the sick with gloves, sticks, and careful distance. Scholars still argue about how much these early isolation practices affected mortality rates, but it's one of the first recognitions that disease can spread from person to person, a rudimentary grasp of epidemiology centuries ahead of its time. You take a moment to look at a handwritten medical text, a collection of remedies, prayers, and advice from monks and physicians. Some are logical: wash wounds with wine, feed patients nourishing broths. Others are utterly bizarre: carry a hare's foot to ward off plague, or drink the tears of a virgin. Yet through all of it runs a theme: ingenuity under pressure, humanity in extremis, and the desperate desire to save life in a world dominated by death. As dusk falls, the city quiets. Candles flicker through windows, smoke curls from chimneys, and the distant toll of church bells marks vespers. You feel a strange respect for these medieval healers, for their courage, their improvisation, and their refusal to surrender entirely to fear. They didn't have microscopes, vaccines, or antibiotics, but they had knowledge, ritual, and hope. Stepping outside into the cool evening air, you catch the scent of herbs, burning wood, and human determination. You realize that medicine in medieval Europe was a delicate dance between faith and pragmatism, fear and ingenuity, superstition and observation. It was messy, imperfect, and occasionally deadly, but it laid the groundwork for the modern world's understanding of healing. As the moon rises over the rooftops, you carry with you the echo of chanting, the scent of vinegar and sage, and the quiet persistence of humans trying to survive against unimaginable odds. Hope, after all, was often the strongest prescription of all.
You drift through the bustling streets of medieval Baghdad, the call to prayer echoing across domes and minarets, blending with the clatter of merchants' carts and the chatter of scholars. The city hums like a living library, knowledge flowing as freely as the Tigris, ink as precious as gold. You sense immediately that medicine here is not just a craft, but an intellectual pursuit, a sacred duty intertwined with philosophy, ethics, and observation. You enter a grand library, the scent of parchment and ink enveloping you. Shelves rise like walls of wisdom, stacked with manuscripts written in neat Arabic calligraphy. Here, scholars such as Al-Razi, also known as Rhazes, and Ibn Sina, also known as Avicenna, have meticulously documented medical knowledge from centuries past and added their own observations. You can almost see them now, hunched over desks, quills scratching, eyes scanning, minds racing. Al-Razi, you learn, pioneered clinical observation. He emphasizes careful documentation of symptoms, insisting that physicians must see and listen before they treat. You imagine him in a small hospital ward, noting patients' conditions, comparing fevers, rashes, and pulses, writing notes that would later influence generations in Europe. He even distinguished between smallpox and measles, centuries before modern medicine confirmed it, a remarkable achievement in observational diagnosis. Nearby, Avicenna writes in his monumental Canon of Medicine, a text so comprehensive it will be used in European universities for centuries. He blends Greek, Indian, and Persian medical knowledge into a systematic framework: anatomy, physiology, surgery, pharmacology, and ethics. You notice sections describing hygiene, diet, and the psychological dimensions of illness. A sound mind in a sound body, he seems to whisper through the ink. Scholars still argue about how much of this knowledge was original versus inherited, but its influence is undeniable. You wander into a hospital, a bimeristan, bustling with patients, students, and doctors. Marble floors gleam in the sunlight streaming through high windows, while wards are arranged for easy observation. Physicians move from bed to bed, examining patients with care, recording symptoms and prescribing herbal remedies, diet adjustments, or surgical interventions. You can see the echoes of Greek humoral theory here, but enriched with new empirical insights and practical ethics. Surgery is performed with caution and precision. You notice a patient with an abscess. The surgeon prepares his instruments, disinfects with vinegar, and uses forceps to drain the infection. Nearby, a young apprentice observes intently, learning not only technique, but the moral responsibility that comes with wielding a blade. Treatment is always paired with ethical consideration. Harming a patient is a moral failing as well as a clinical one. You watch students debate the use of herbal remedies: willow bark for pain, rosewater for inflammation, myrrh for antiseptic purposes. The discussions are lively, logical, and deeply analytical. You realize that the Islamic Golden Age didn't simply preserve knowledge, it expanded it, systematized it, and critically evaluated it. Evidence, observation, and reasoning are paramount long before the modern scientific method would be formalized. You step into a quieter chamber where scholars study anatomy. Cadavers are examined discreetly, and detailed illustrations of muscles, vessels, and organs line the walls. These early anatomical sketches, though limited, reveal a surprisingly sophisticated understanding of human physiology. You notice diagrams of the eye, the heart, and the brain, studies centuries ahead of European dissections. In a small apothecary adjacent to the hospital, pharmacists measure, mix, and label medicines with meticulous care. Substances are cataloged according to their properties, effects, and recommended dosages. You watch as a student carefully measures a powdered mixture for a patient with a fever, balancing efficacy, safety, and tradition. This is medicine as science and art simultaneously. Outside, the courtyard hums with the quiet rhythm of life. Water fountains trickle, the scent of jasmine drifts through the air, and the distant call of merchants mixes with the occasional coughing patient. You can feel the dedication and discipline that sustain this vibrant intellectual culture, a culture that treats healing as both craft and moral duty. Scholars still debate whether the Golden Age's medical texts influenced the Renaissance directly or indirectly. But walking through Baghdad's streets and libraries, you sense the continuity of knowledge. Here, human curiosity and compassion converge, producing a legacy that bridges civilizations and centuries. As dusk falls, lanterns glow warmly across the city. You step outside onto a quiet street, inhaling the soft scent of ink, herbs, and earth. You realize that in this city of light and learning, medicine was never just treatment. It was illumination, a way to understand life, body, and soul simultaneously. You stand in a candlelit chamber that smells faintly of iron, herbs, and old linen. The table before you is covered with an array of polished metal instruments, blades, bowls, and glass cups, gleaming ominously in the flickering light. Around you, murmurs fill the air, patients whispering prayers, apprentices debating theories, and physicians quoting Hippocrates and Galen. Tonight, you're about to witness one of history's most persistent medical practices, bloodletting, the belief that illness can be drained away through the body's own veins. You step closer. A physician in a dark robe steadies a trembling patient, his sleeve rolled up, his pulse faint. The doctor ties a cloth above the elbow, selects a fine, curved blade, and makes a careful incision. A thin stream of blood trickles into a brass bowl. The patient winces, but the doctor nods in satisfaction. To him, this is healing. The theory behind this ritual goes back to the Greeks, the four humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, must remain in balance. Too much blood, too much heat in the system, then let some out. Simple, elegant, and as you realize with his sinking feeling, often deadly. You move among the onlookers, some solemn, others fascinated. A barber surgeon, part hairdresser, part doctor, hums softly as he sharpens his blade. His red and white pole outside, now a universal symbol of barbershops, actually represents this very practice. Red for blood, white for bandages, and the pole itself symbolizing the stick patients once gripped to encourage blood flow. You can't help but think how something so macabre could become so ordinary. Across centuries, this belief in bloodletting spreads like a contagion of its own. You watch it practiced in ancient Greece, then carried through Rome, perfected in the Islamic world, and later adopted across Europe and Asia. It becomes so routine that no physician's reputation feels complete without it. Kings, popes, generals all bled regularly to restore balance. Even George Washington, centuries later, would be bled 4 times in a single day during his final illness, an act modern historians believe hastened his death. Scholars still argue whether the practice ever truly helped, or merely offered the illusion of control in the face of chaos. Now you find yourself in a small medieval infirmary. A monk holds a jar of leeches, black, glistening, and lazily twisting in murky water. He lifts one out with tongs and places it gently on a patient's arm. Within moments, the leech latches on, its body swelling as it drinks. The monk watches patiently, murmuring that nature herself takes what is in excess. Leeches, he claims, are gentler than knives. You watch as the leech drops off, bloated and sluggish, its work done. The patient sighs with relief. Placebo or not, the ritual brings calm. In a Renaissance hall, you observe an anatomist lecturing students. He gestures toward diagrams showing how different veins correspond to specific ailments: headache, fever, melancholy, or hysteria. Each illness has a precise spot to bleed. The logic is strangely elegant, and yet the evidence for success remains purely anecdotal. You catch a line from the lecture: "Too much blood in the brain clouds reason, let it flow, and clarity returns." You stifle a grim smile. So much confidence, so little proof. You wander further through time, finding yourself in a 17th century European townhouse. A nobleman reclines in a chair, pale and feverish. His physician arrives with ornate tools: golden lancets, silver cups, fine linen cloths. The ritual unfolds like a performance: careful preparation, solemn silence, and a final flourish as blood darkens the bowl. Servants watch anxiously. The nobleman insists he feels lighter, clearer, better. Maybe he does. Maybe belief itself is the most potent medicine of all. By the 18th century, you see bloodletting reach its zenith. Hospitals, clinics, and battlefields all practicing it. In France, physicians boast of removing liters of blood to reset the body. In England, pamphlets advise bleeding at the change of seasons to prevent sickness.
Even in America, traveling blood doctors advertise cures for everything from gout to heartbreak. You can almost hear the quills scratching in journals, recording cases with confidence and pride, as if the human body were an overflowing cup that simply needed draining. And yet, cracks begin to appear. You meet skeptical doctors, cautious voices like Pierre Louis, who in the 1830s conducted one of the first statistical analyses of medical treatments. He compared patients who were bled with those who weren't, and found no consistent benefit, sometimes quite the opposite. The revelation was shocking. Centuries of practice, endless lives lost, and no real evidence. Still, even after this, the art of bleeding lingered, slowly dying out only as germ theory and modern diagnostics took over. You look again at the tools laid out on the table. The blades, the bowls, the cups, the leeches. They tell a story not of barbarism, but of human persistence. People have always sought ways to bring order to illness, to turn suffering into something understandable. You can't help but admire that stubborn hope. Even when it was misguided, it was rooted in compassion and curiosity. The last leech in the jar wriggles lazily. The last candle burns low. You stand quietly, realizing that medicine, like blood itself, flows in cycles: discovery, belief, mistake, correction. Each era bleeds a little ignorance to make room for wisdom. As the room fades to darkness, you can almost hear the echo of the ancient physicians, calm, certain, and endlessly human, whispering that sometimes the cure and the cause are separated only by a thin red line.
You tread softly along a fog-draped European village, the cobblestones slick with dew. Lanterns cast flickering shadows that dance along the half-timbered cottages, giving the streets a surreal, almost otherworldly glow. Here, in the hush of night, medicine wears a different face, hidden, whispered, and often feared. The real healers are women, midwives, herbalists, and wise women who carry centuries of practical knowledge, yet exist in the shadows of a patriarchal society that distrusts their power. You see them moving quietly between cottages, baskets of dried herbs clinking softly against their sides. Chamomile, sage, willow bark, foxglove. Plants gathered not just for flavor, but for healing, pain relief, and sometimes even subtle psychological effects. Their methods are empirical, passed from mother to daughter, grandmother to granddaughter. Yet society brands them with suspicion. Whispers of witchcraft, curses, and sorcery follow their steps. You realize the irony. The very people keeping communities alive through knowledge and care are feared as agents of death. You enter a small, dimly lit room. A midwife sits beside a laboring mother, hands steady, voice calm, and eyes attentive. She guides the mother through breathing techniques, massages her back, and administers a tea of raspberry leaves to ease contractions. You notice the precision in her movements, the careful timing and the meticulous attention to hygiene, centuries before hospitals formalized maternity care. Scholars still argue how much of this knowledge survived, given persecution, yet you can see its fingerprints on modern obstetrics. In another cottage, an herbalist mixes poultices and tinctures. A neighbor brings a child with a fever. The woman crushes willow bark into a fine powder and brews a bitter tea. The child grimaces, but drinks it obediently. You recognize the active compound, salicin, centuries before aspirin would make it mainstream. These women are scientists in their own right, though their laboratories are hearths, mortar and pestle, and intuition honed by generations. Yet danger lurks.
You overhear villagers muttering about a woman accused of causing miscarriages or poisoning livestock. The line between genuine healing and societal fear is perilously thin. Trials and burnings are common. Women are condemned for practicing what they do best. You can feel the tension in the air. Knowledge intertwined with peril. Care shadowed by suspicion. Even so, these healers persevere. They know which herbs soothe pain, which teas settle digestion, which poultices staunch bleeding. They understand early signs of infection, fevers, and ailments of the mind. They perform minor surgeries and extractions with remarkable skill, often improvising tools from household items when metal instruments are unavailable. Their work is subtle, precise, and grounded in empirical observation, yet cloaked in the language of ritual, song, and prayer to protect both patient and practitioner. You notice a fascinating continuity. Practices you've seen in Africa, India, and China echo here in Europe, distilled into secret codes and whispered instructions. Plant remedies, energy work, and holistic care traverse continents, carried in oral traditions rather than manuscripts. Scholars still debate how much of Europe's true medical knowledge owes its survival to these women in hiding, but it is clear, without them, much would have been lost to fear and fire. In the moonlight, you watch one of these healers walking home, basket swinging, eyes alert. Children follow at a distance, curious, learning, absorbing the skills that might one day pass down centuries more. Her shadow stretches long across the village, symbolic of the silent yet enduring impact of women healers throughout European history. As dawn nears, the village stirs with church bells and the daily hustle of life. You step back into the cool morning air, reflecting on the paradox. The women most vilified by society were the very lifelines of knowledge, survival, and care. Their resilience ensured that empirical wisdom, even when buried in shadows, would persist, bridging centuries and inspiring generations long after the flames of superstition dimmed. You realize that healing, like courage, often survives in the most unlikely hands, hidden, whispered, and enduring despite fear. And in that quiet persistence, you sense the heartbeat of a forgotten, yet profoundly human medical legacy.
You step into a cluttered, candlelit laboratory of an early modern physician, shelves brimming with jars of powders, liquids, and odd curiosities. The air smells of alcohol, herbs, and something vaguely metallic. Here, you realize medicine isn't always the result of careful theory. Sometimes it's sheer accident, intuition, and a stubborn refusal to accept death quietly. On a small wooden table, a physician inspects a bread mold that has spread across a forgotten loaf. He doesn't throw it away in disgust. Instead, he studies it carefully, noting that certain patients seem to recover more quickly after consuming plant extracts exposed to similar molds. Centuries later, you know this as penicillin, the first antibiotic, a serendipitous miracle hidden in the fuzzy growth of common mold. Scholars still debate how long ancient civilizations noticed mold's effects, but the principle of observation leading to life-saving discovery is timeless. Nearby, a vial of mercury glints in the lamplight. You cringe slightly, knowing its toxicity, but the physician swears by its efficacy against syphilis. He mixes it carefully with other compounds, applying it to patients with diligence and caution. It's imperfect, even dangerous, but for those facing a slow, painful death, it represents hope, a gamble that sometimes tips the balance in favor of life.
You watch as another experiment unfolds. A physician collects urine from patients and analyzes its color, clarity, and odor. It seems unappealing, even grotesque, but these observations provide early diagnostic insight, whether a patient has diabetes, kidney disease, or infection. You marvel at how necessity turns the ordinary and repulsive into tools of profound understanding. Desperation, after all, can be a powerful motivator. On a table across the room, you notice dried herbs, crushed gems, and animal parts, seemingly chaotic. Yet beneath the apparent disorder is method, trial and error, repeated observation, and an instinct for what works. Some patients survive against all odds, others perish. The physician records everything meticulously, scribbling notes in fading ink, successes, failures, and strange coincidences that might have otherwise been dismissed. You recall that across centuries, many accidental discoveries are tied to basic, sometimes repulsive materials. Nitrous oxide, once inhaled for amusement, becomes anesthesia. Willow bark, long chewed for headaches, leads to aspirin. Fermented substances reveal antiseptic properties. Scholars still argue which discoveries were truly intentional and which were serendipitous. But the outcomes speak for themselves. Life saved, suffering alleviated, knowledge expanded. A young apprentice sneezes, knocking over a jar of powdered herbs. The physician notes the chemical reaction, unexpected, but potentially useful. Such happy accidents shape understanding in ways no textbook predicts. You can almost hear the thrill in the room. Each mishap or surprise is a clue, a step forward in the never-ending quest to bend nature toward healing. You wander to a corner where a forgotten patient remedy lies, a paste made from dung and honey. You wrinkle your nose, but when applied to wounds, it prevents infection. A crude antiseptic, discovered not by reasoning, but by observing what worked in practice. Medicine, you realize, has always been a mixture of logic, intuition, trial, and luck. In another chamber, you witness early vaccinations. A physician takes material from a mild smallpox infection and introduces it to a healthy patient. It's risky, even horrifying by today's standards, but it sparks immunity, an accidental discovery built on centuries of empirical experimentation, observation, and bold curiosity. The air grows still as you reflect on all these incidents. Accidental discoveries are reminders that progress often emerges from desperation, patience, and attention to the smallest details. The unexpected, the repulsive, even the frightening, all become tools when wielded with knowledge, care, and courage. As night settles outside, the flickering candlelight illuminates jars, tools, and manuscripts, a testament to human ingenuity. You step back, realizing that medicine is as much about curiosity and observation as about formal theory. Sometimes the world gives answers in unexpected packages, and those bold enough to notice can change lives forever. You leave the lab with a renewed respect for trial, error, and the strange genius born from necessity. In the shadows of accident, brilliance often blooms.
You find yourself in a quiet room, the soft glow of a lantern illuminating stacks of ancient texts, jars of dried herbs, and dusty surgical tools. You take a deep breath and realize that tonight you're not chasing cures or examining remedies. You're tracing the shadowy boundary where observation meets imagination, where biology intertwines with belief. Across civilizations and centuries, the two have often danced so closely that it's hard to tell where one ends and the other begins. You pick up a manuscript from ancient Egypt, its hieroglyphs detailing poultices, honey ointments, and crocodile dung for wounds. Some of it is effective,
some bizarre. Yet alongside the practical instructions are prayers, invocations, and offerings. Reminders that healing was a blend of empirical observation and spiritual belief. The lines blur, and you feel the human need to find meaning in suffering, to assign cause and remedy even when understanding is limited. In Greece, humoral theory governs medicine. Blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, each imbalance explaining headache, fever, or melancholy. Treatments like bleeding or purging seem harsh, but the logic is consistent: an observable cause, a prescribed action. Even today, you realize this system echoes in modern ideas of homeostasis, the body's internal balance, reinterpreted and validated through centuries of science. Scholars still argue whether ancient humoral theory was entirely metaphorical or an early intuitive grasp of physiology, but it shaped approaches that persist subtly in diagnostics and patient care. You glance at an Islamic Golden Age text, notes from Avicenna and Al-Razi, ethical guidelines, observation of symptoms, dietary instructions, scientific in method, yet entwined with philosophical reasoning about the mind, spirit, and soul. Medicine is holistic, not just mechanical. You notice a pattern: ancient practitioners always integrated social, spiritual, and environmental context into treatment, a principle modern medicine increasingly acknowledges through patient-centered care and psychosomatic awareness. A shadow crosses your path, reminding you of Europe's midwives and witches, persecuted for their knowledge. Their rituals, charms, and whispered spells were dismissed as superstition, yet hidden within were empirically tested remedies, herbs that alleviated pain, treated fevers, or aided childbirth. You recognize how belief, framed as ritual, reinforced compliance and consistency in treatment. Placebo, yes, but also a practical effect. Medicine, you realize, is not purely chemical. Psychology, expectation, and trust are powerful ingredients. You reflect on the strange legacy of leeches, bloodletting, and poultices, once hailed as cures, now mostly obsolete. Yet they represent early attempts to systematize knowledge, to act on what is observed. Even today, in some modern clinics, you see vestiges of this mindset: the careful attention to pulse, observation of symptoms, and minor interventions reminiscent of old practices, albeit updated and sanitized by contemporary science. You step back and see that superstition was never purely irrational. It guided observation, preserved knowledge, and structured treatment in societies without microscopes, laboratories, or clinical trials. Even when incorrect, these frameworks shaped the way humans approached the unknown, forming the scaffolding on which real science would later build. Looking around the room at jars, manuscripts, and skeletal models, you feel the continuum of human ingenuity. Every charm, poultice, or ritual represents curiosity, creativity, and a desire to act against suffering. You sense that the line between science and superstition is not rigid. It is dynamic, evolving as understanding grows, yet never fully erasing the echoes of the past. As you dim the lantern and let the room settle into shadow, you realize that even modern medicine owes a quiet debt to belief, intuition, and the lessons learned in centuries of trial and error. The dance continues. Observation informs faith, faith inspires experimentation, and together they shape healing. In that moment, you understand. To respect medicine's past is to appreciate both its science and its superstition, and to see how the human impulse to heal, understand, and hope transcends eras.
You sit quietly in the fading glow of twilight, the echoes of centuries of healing swirling around you like a gentle wind. From the mud huts of Africa to the bustling streets of medieval Europe, from the golden libraries of Baghdad to the candlelit chambers of Renaissance physicians, you realize that medicine has always been more than remedies. It is a story of humanity itself. You think back to the African spirit doctors, tending patients by firelight, blending herbs and song to heal both body and soul. You remember the Indian surgeons, Sushruta and his meticulous reconstructions, demonstrating a mastery of technique long before anesthesia existed. You picture the midwives and herbalists of Europe, practicing in shadows, ensuring survival despite persecution. Each healer, in their own way, acted out of empathy, careful observation, and a relentless will to help, often improvising with the tools and knowledge at hand. You reflect on the accidental discoveries: mold that becomes penicillin, willow bark evolving into aspirin, early vaccinations inspired by observation and daring experimentation. These serendipitous breakthroughs remind us that innovation often springs from necessity, curiosity, and a willingness to notice the smallest detail. Scholars still debate the origins and efficacy of these early remedies, but their impact is undeniable. Even the practices that seem strange or dangerous in hindsight, bloodletting, poultices, or ritualistic chants, carry lessons. They teach patience, humility, and the recognition that healing is never purely mechanical. It involves the mind and spirit, not just the body. Observing a patient, listening to symptoms, understanding context, these are timeless practices that underpin modern medicine, now supported by technology and evidence, yet rooted in intuition honed over millennia. You remember the stories of plague-stricken streets, the scent of vinegar and herbs, the chants of hopeful villagers. You feel the pulse of human persistence, how communities relied on knowledge passed down, tested through trial and error, blending belief with observation, hope with practicality. Humanity learned not just which treatments worked, but how to care, how to persevere, and how to respond when certainty was impossible. As the night deepens, you consider the moral lessons: empathy for the suffering, curiosity to seek answers, courage to act despite fear. These qualities transcend cultures and eras. Ancient healers may not have had microscopes or germ theory, but they had humanity, the very quality that continues to define healthcare today. You let your mind wander through the continuum of healing across time. From charm and chant to antiseptic and anesthesia, the thread remains the same: a commitment to easing pain, preserving life, and honoring the intricate connection between body, mind, and spirit. In every wound stitched, every herb crushed, every whispered prayer, you sense the heartbeat of compassion that links past and present. Now dim the lights, exhale slowly, and feel the gentle reassurance that the human desire to heal, to observe, and to understand is as alive today as it was thousands of years ago. Every cough soothed, every fever cooled, every life preserved is a continuation of a story begun long ago. The lessons of ancient healers remain with us, quietly guiding, endlessly inspiring, and reminding us that empathy and observation are as vital as any medicine. Let this reflection settle softly like a balm over the mind. Their legacy is not just in the cures they discovered, but in the humanity they embodied. In this, you realize the past whispers its wisdom,
offering not only knowledge, but comfort.
Now, as the night deepens, you sink into the quiet comfort of your space, letting the echoes of ancient healers drift gently through your mind. Imagine the soft glow of candlelight flickering over scrolls, the gentle rustle of leaves in a midnight herb garden, the distant rhythm of drums or prayers carried on warm winds. Each moment, each memory, carries a subtle reassurance. Humanity has always sought to understand, to care, and to preserve life. You breathe slowly, feeling the rise and fall of your chest, letting your mind wander through centuries of quiet diligence. You picture midwives guiding births by lantern, scholars examining ancient texts in grand libraries, and spirit doctors listening carefully to the whispers of the sick. Even the accidental discoveries, mold, willow bark, the first glimpses of immunity, remind you that curiosity and observation often blossom into miracles when we pay attention. The candlelight with history softens into a soothing glow. You sense the persistence of knowledge, lessons that travel across continents, passed from hand to hand, whispered from mother to child, preserved in careful notes, and lived in patient care. The boundary between science and superstition, trial and error, belief and observation, it all melds into a gentle rhythm, like the ebbing of a calm tide. Feel the comfort in knowing that the human desire to heal is timeless. Every pulse, every careful observation, every whispered encouragement and touch carries forward the compassion and wisdom of countless healers long gone. Their hands, their minds, their hearts, still present in the care we give today. Let this thought settle around you like a soft blanket. Exhale slowly, letting your mind release the worries of the day. The lessons of the past are not only in medicine, but in empathy, patience, and the quiet determination to care. Drift gently into sleep, cradled by the wisdom and warmth of those who healed before us, letting your imagination wander safely among their stories.